nTree is a fantastic app available for iOS and Android mobile devices. It provides data entry and other functionality for MYOB Greentree. Let me show you how to install it. As we are installing nTree onto a brand new standard Greentree demo, we first need to install the nAbleUs framework, as nTree is deployed through nAbleUs. If you want to know more about nAbleUs, have a look at the nAbleUs overview video on YouTube. The link is below. The nAbleUs framework is installed using Pacman. Simply open your favorite FTP tool, in my case FileZilla, go to the MYOB FTP site for Greentree packages. There, find the folder called nAbleUs and download the latest package to your packages folder. To install nTree using nAbleUs, we must first rename the package we have just downloaded to debug.package. This is only required the first time you install nAbleUs. You do not need to rename the package when doing any future updates. We now run Pacman as usual. On my system, this takes 10 or 11 minutes, and I already have Pacman configured. However, to keep the video at least a little interesting, I'll fast forward this section. Everyone still there? If only packaging could be that quick in real life. Now, I prefer to run Greentree in multi-user mode even for demos and testing purposes. This requires I start the Greentree services before logging on. With the Greentree services started, we can open a multi-user client to log in. I am using a FAT client and using the Super account. This may be a little slow because I have only just started Greentree, so it will still be starting up the background applications. To initialize nTree, I go to the System menu and select the now available nAbleUs menu option. From the app maintenance, I refresh the licenses by clicking on the Refresh App List button. This will pull down any licenses that are in their cloud for the demo system. Let's turn on the nTree applets for messaging and timesheets. To ensure the menus and forms are correctly refreshed, having turned on the apps, it is always a good idea to log off and log back on again. Once logged in, we can return to the System menu and reopen the nAbleUs maintenance form. From there, we open up the nTree module control by clicking on the Settings burger against the nTree Timesheets app. All the fields can be left as default. However, it is important to understand the establishment. This is a unique reference for this system and is what links this Greentree database to the nTree data for the remote devices. You can leave it at the default random number or rename it. For example, if you want to easily distinguish between your production system and your test systems. If you do not want to use the default name, it is important you change it now before you go any further. I am going to rename this establishment to show how it is done, and because I have a naming convention for all my Greentree test and demo systems so I can keep track of them. Once renamed, we can now start the nTree service. The nTree service is what communicates with the mobile devices sending and receiving data. Any changes made in your Greentree database when the service is not running will not be sent to the devices. Once the nTree service is running, it is time to initialize the establishment in the cloud. This is done by clicking on the Upload button to send all the seed data needed for the new nTree establishment to the cloud. It can take a few minutes to upload. However, you do not need to keep the form open as it will continue to run in the background while the form is closed. We now have the nTree system set up and ready for service, but we need to set up a user or two. Clicking on the license line shows the users who have been included or excluded in the license count. Names in red need to be configured before they are valid mobile users. In the standard Greentree demo, this is all the users. Let's set up Amanda by double-clicking on her name. For those familiar with the standard Greentree mobile timesheets module, This form will look very familiar. nTree adds a validation window to the bottom of the form so you're able to see what needs to be done to make any user valid. In Amanda's case, we must first set her up as a job cost employee. To do this, we'll open up Amanda's employee record, putting in her name to call her up, and then going to the Security tab and clicking on the JC Employee link. We're setting up a new JC Employee, click OK, and this brings up the JC Employee form. A couple things we need to set up: her employee type, which can be anything you choose, the activity group she belongs to, we'll give her all activities, and if you choose you can give her a default activity. This will flow through to nTree Timesheets and set up be her default activity code. She also has a Greentree login, so tick the Has Login button and select her Greentree user. Save that and return to the nTree employee form. We can now link Amanda's employee record to her new JC employee, which will automatically bring in her HR employee. For simplicity, we'll remove mobile access to the other companies. We can also see in the log below that her password is too short and she has no email address. So let's fix it. We'll save her record, refresh her record, and drill into her username. From there we can go through to user preferences, which takes us to the standard Greentree user setup. In here we set her password, which must be at least 6 characters long, contain at least 1 letter and 1 number. I like to set a default company too. She must have an email address for nTree to work. This is the unique identifier that nTree will identify its users by. The email does not need to be a valid working email, but it must be a valid email format. Once we've entered that information, we can save her record and return to her mobile user preferences. We refresh Amanda's record and we can see she is now a valid nTree user. All that is needed is to close her form and add her to the nTree licenses. When we do this, we push her to the included side and we can see that her name is now black because it is valid. We save that record and that is it done. Amanda can log into nTree.